Hello, this is yet another area in research that I would like us to discuss. It is called unit of analysis. Our discussion will focus on three principal areas, namely the meaning of unit of analysis as it applies in research, the various types or levels of unit of analysis, as well as some of the common errors that researchers often commit while conceptualizing units of analysis. I want to welcome you to this discussion, and I want you to pay as much attention as possible and note down any issue that you feel may require further discussion or clarification. We want to begin by understanding what unit of analysis is, the way it applies to research. A unit of analysis can be understood as an object of study within a research project and which a researcher uses to describe and draw conclusions of the study. For example, a researcher that seeks to investigate factors affecting household decision on use of solar energy as a source of power will consider the households as the unit of analysis. Or a study that wants to understand factors that contribute to individuals or students' involvement in drug abuse will consider the individual student as the unit of analysis. Alternatively, if a study seeks to understand, say, strategies that have been employed by an organization to enhance employee performance, then organization at that level becomes the unit of analysis. A unit of analysis, therefore, is the entity that a researcher wishes to say something about the outcomes and conclusion of the study. We can also understand it as the object, a person, or an issue, or an entity that the study wishes to speak on its behalf. So that a unit of analysis is the voice upon which a study wants to project and present to the public or to the readers. It is important that a researcher selects the correct unit of analysis because it will determine the kind of information that's obtained and the kind of conclusions that the researcher makes about the findings of the study. So unit of analysis is an important thing. We now want to turn our attention to the various levels or types of units of analysis that are available for studies. One of the level or type of unit of analysis is called individual. An individual is the smallest unit of analysis, and an individual here can be a person, an animal, or a business unit. It is normally considered as the smallest or the lowest level of unit analysis that a researcher can use to identify and describe a phenomenon, and therefore the researcher uses to set out his or her investigative studies. For instance, a researcher who is interested in understanding the determinants of employees' performance in accounts department in any given organization will consider the individual employee as the unit of analysis. Why? This is because the study will collect information and data that relates to the performance of an individual employee, so that the focus here is the individual employee, not the entire organization, but rather the individual employee. So the conclusions that the researcher makes will relate specifically to the individual employee and not the organization as a whole, because the focus and the kind of data that a researcher collects for purposes of answering the research objectives will relate to the individual employee and not the entire organization. So individual is normally considered as the lowest level of uh, unit of analysis that can possibly be reached by a researcher. If we want to understand what happens to individuals, or we want to understand the perspectives of individuals on a given issue, then our unit of analysis will be the individual. And therefore, the results of the study presented will represent the voice of the individual. The other type of analysis or level of analysis is the geographical unit. And geographical units are normally large geographic areas, for example, states, counties, provinces, and even confederations. Confederations can be a collection of various states, like what we have under the East African Community, the Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Somalia recently, DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and South Sudan. They form a confederation of East African. So that can also be a geographical unit. Geographical units may also refer to specific locations within these areas, such as, say, a city in Kenya, a township in Uganda, or a village in Sudan. Those becomes geographical units within the larger location. A geographical area is considered a unit of analysis if the study seeks to understand issues that are unique or specific to a given geographical area. For example, a research which seeks to understand similarities and differences in county government strategies in revenue collection will have a county government as the unit of analysis. Or if a study seeks, say, to understand various strategies put in place by various municipalities in garbage collection, then the municipality becomes the geographical unit. And in that case, it becomes the unit of analysis. So that findings of the study speaks or projects the opinion and the perspective of that particular geographical unit. Another important level or type of unit of analysis is called groups. And groups, we mean collection of people who share common characteristics, interact with one another, and have some feelings of unity. And the smallest group comprises of 2 people, and the biggest group has indefinite number. So when we talk of groups, we mean entities such as families, friendship groups, peer groups, street gangs, work teams, work committees, church choir, a music band, or business partners, among others. A group is a unit of analysis for studies that seek to understand social interaction and social processes in groups and how they affect the operations and behaviors of individual members of that particular group, or how they affect people's perception elsewhere. For example, a researcher that seeks to study characteristics of street gangs or teamwork in organization will have group as the unit of analysis, so that the results or the conclusions that a study draws, they are based on the perspective of the group and not the individual or not the geographical unit as we noted earlier. So groups is an important area. For instance, studies that focuses on teams, teamwork in organizations, group work in organizations, self-help groups, among others, they will constitute what we call groups. In that case, therefore, the group becomes the unit of analysis for such types of studies. Another level of unit of analysis is organizations. An organization is also a potential area that researchers might wish to base their study findings on. Organizations may include corporations, learning institutions such as primary schools, secondary schools, colleges and universities, sports organizations such as football federations, business establishments such as a bank, and even government agencies such as parastatals, among others. In the broader field of social sciences, organizations normally are the object of analysis for many disciplines, such as sociology, economics, political science, psychology, management, and even organizational communication. For example, studies focusing on organizational performance, organizational culture, organizational policies, organizational values, organizational leadership, organizational change, and even organizational conflicts will have organizations as their unit of analysis. This is because the issues being researched on affect the entire organization, and therefore that study is conducted at the level of organization, not at the level of individuals. In that case, therefore, information that speak to the organization might be those that are obtained from written documents about the organization and even perspectives or opinions of top-level management in the organization about how issues are conducted in those particular organizations. So organizations is also an important area of unit of analysis that a lot of disciplines, as we have noted, might consider for purposes of study. Social artifacts is yet another level or type of unit of analysis that researchers might want to consider or confronted with in the course of their studies. But what do we mean by social artifacts? By artifacts, we mean objects, representations, assemblages, institutions, knowledge, and conceptual frameworks that are used to attain a particular expression, interpretation, goal, or desired ends. Some of the examples of social artifacts might include books, newspapers, advertisements, websites, technological devices such as phones, films, photographs, paintings, clothes, scientific discoveries, furniture, machines, and buildings, among others. It is understood generally that scientific analysis of artifacts may provide valuable insights about the individuals and groups of individuals who created or used them. For example, studies that seek to understand new fashion trends in clothing, in automobiles, in music systems, and even diets will have social artifacts as a unit of analysis. Social artifacts basically are physical, both material and non-material objects that their analysis could help researchers understand certain aspects about life. For instance, archaeological studies have studied artifacts in the archaeological field sites by looking at maybe dump sites of the ancient man, just to understand the bones that are thrown there, the tools that are thrown there, and other items, just to enable them understand or have an understanding of the type of foods they used to eat, the types of clothes they used to wear, and even the types of tools they used uh, 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 to till the land, to cut trees and timber, and even to hunt wild animals. So all those are artifacts, and therefore artifacts can become an important unit of analysis. I now want us to look at some of the common errors that are often committed by researchers in their conceptualization of unit of analysis. One of the most common errors is called the error of reductionism. By reductionism, we mean the attempt by researchers to explain complex events in terms of simpler and lower level events. However, in the context of research, reductionism occurs when a researcher uses a data from a lower level unit of analysis to make conclusions about a higher level unit of analysis. For example, a researcher using individual level data to draw conclusions about groups commits the error of reductionism. And this error can lead to collection of data which is not only irrelevant and inaccurate, but also leads to the arrival of wrong conclusions. Take the case of a situation in which a researcher wants to understand an issue around organizational culture, but instead of looking at data that speaks about organizations as a whole, the researcher focuses on individual employees and therefore gather data that only relate to individual employees. But when presenting findings and making conclusions about the study, then the researcher makes conclusions about an organization, yet the information that was collected related only to the individual. In that case, the researcher has committed an error called reductionism. The other type of error is called ecological fallacy. Ecological fallacy occurs when researchers use data from a higher level unit of analysis to make claims about a lower level unit of analysis. For instance, a researcher that seeks to understand whether alcohol and substance abuse are common in certain universities than others. The researcher may move on and obtain data on the prevalence of drugs and substance abuse from individual students, but then goes ahead to conclude that universities, say with medical programs, have more cases of drugs and substance abuse. In that case, they might conclude that medical students are more likely to abuse drugs. I wish to know that that kind of conclusion will not be accurate or inappropriate, because data that was obtained was on drug abuse by universities and not individual students. And therefore, such information can only be used to make conclusions about universities, not individual students, such as in the case of, say, medical students or students pursuing a particular program of study. Therefore, drawing conclusions about students generally, while the available data is about the university, amounts to ecological fallacy. That is, if we focus on a higher unit of analysis, but end up collecting data on, rather end up making conclusions about lower level unit of analysis, then we have committed the error that we call ecological fallacy error. The other type, and which in our case is the last form of error that researchers often commit with regard to unit of analysis, is what called exceptional fallacy. The exception fallacy is also known as the stereotype fallacy, and relates to making conclusions about a group of people based on observations of data or data on one individual. So that we make one observation of an individual, and then we conclude that the broader group where that individual belongs, behaves in the same way as the individual. For instance, if a researcher sees a university student drunk and disorderly in public and concludes that all university students are drunk and disorderly in public, then that kind of error is called exceptional fallacy error. And results drawn under a study conducted under one type of unit of analysis cannot apply to a different unit of analysis. An analysis and a study must be conducted at the same level at which generalizations are desired. In other words, if the focus is on individual as a unit of analysis, then conclusions should be drawn about the individual. And if the focus is on organizations, then again, findings and conclusions must be contextualized within an organization and not the broader area of and not other types of units of analysis. With those areas clarified, I want to thank you for your time, and I still want to urge you to take note of any issue that's not clear, so that you may raise it at appropriate time, either through the texts or comments, or when we are having our normal physical lectures. Thank you.